It's a good thing I've got a little bit of extra time these days. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. It's been a few months since I last did a haul video, so I wanted to share with you the 40 Blu-rays that I picked up this past month. I usually only get a few Blu-rays each month, but April was a big sale month for a lot of the more boutique distributors, so I splurged a bit. The movies I'm going to go through today, I got in 3 separate online orders. The first was from Bull Moose, which is a local Maine music and movie store, and I picked up some Arrow Video, Criterion Collection, and Kino Lorber Blu-rays through them. The second order was through Kino Lorber directly, as part of their seemingly perpetual while supplies last sale. And the final order was through Screen Archives Entertainment, and consisted exclusively of Twilight Time Blu-ray releases. Most of these movies are a bit obscure, and all of them are actually blind buys for me, but I'm very excited to check them out, and I'm equally excited to share with you what I got. Be sure to check out the description of this video for links to buy all of the Blu-rays I'm going to be talking about. They're affiliate links, and I earn a small commission if you buy anything using them, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them. Alright, so let's start with the Bull Moose order, and I'll begin with the Arrow Video releases. So the first one here is probably the least obscure movie in this whole haul, and that's An American Werewolf in London. So this is one that I don't really know why I've never seen before. I've been aware of it a long time, and I've been interested in watching it for a very long time, but somehow never got around to it, which is weird because I really like horror comedies, and I really like John Landis. I mean, Coming to America and Trading Places are some of my favorite comedies. So finally have it so I can finally check it out. The second one here is another movie that I don't really have an excuse for not having seen. This is probably the second least obscure movie in this whole haul, and that is Children of the Corn. Again, been aware of it a really long time. I've seen parts of it on TV at points and parts of some of the sequels on TV, but I've never actually seen the whole thing. And it's even more crazy because, again, I'm in Maine here, and this is based on a Stephen King story. So no excuse, but I finally have it. And this one's really cool because this Arrow Video has a slipcover, as you can see here, and some of them do. Some of their releases have them. Not typically, but some do. And this one's especially cool because it's got this very interesting texture. I know that's something that's not going to come across in the video, but it's kind of, the best way I can describe it is almost velveteen feeling. Feels like velvet, but it doesn't have any sort of fuzz or kind of fur to it. So I don't really know what this material is, but it's very cool. So I like that slipcover. Third Arrow Video release here is The Day of the Jackal. So this is one that I don't know too much about, other than it's kind of like an assassin thriller movie from the 70s, I think 1973. And this is one that I've kind of had my eye on for a little bit, but never really went all in to finally get it until this haul. So I'm curious to check this one out. And the last Arrow Video release here is Deep Red. So this is a Dario Argento movie, so this is an Italian giallo film. And this is one that last year, during Bull Moose's Arrow Video sale, I almost bought. I was so close to buying this one last year, because I bought a few of his other movies, like The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. But I put this one back, because I couldn't justify the extra, like, $18 that it was last year. So it dropped cheaper this year, and I wanted to finally get it. So, Deep Red. So next up is the Criterion section of this Bull Moose order, and that is In the Heat of the Night. So this is a movie from 1967. This is spine number 959 in the Criterion collection. And this is a movie that I thought I already owned for some reason. I thought I got this as part of my kind of big Criterion haul at the end of last year, but I didn't, and so I wanted to kind of correct that. So this is a Sidney Poitier movie where he plays Virgil Tibbs, so the first of the Tibbs series. And this is one that I, again, have known about for a long time, but have never gotten around to seeing. And I've recently been watching a lot of the Poitier films, so I wanted to make sure I had this one. And it worked out because this, through Bull Moose's sale, this was actually $19.97, so it's 2 cents cheaper than what this would have been during the Barnes & Noble half off, 50% off Criterion sale that they do biannually. So I got 2 cents cheaper by forgetting it around Christmas time. So now we're into the Kino Lorber section of the Bull Moose sale. And the first one here is Blackmail. So this is an Alfred Hitchcock movie, a very early Hitchcock. This was from 1929, and this was actually his first talkie. Right before this, he had released a handful of silent films, like The Lodger and Downhill. But this was his first movie with sound, his first feature-length movie with sound. And so that's pretty exciting. I really like Hitchcock, and so I wanted to get this one because this is one of his movies I've never seen before. Next up is probably the most recent, the newest movie from this haul, and that is Dogtooth. So this came out only back in like 2009, and this is a Yorgos Lanthimos movie, which is interesting because it's like 2 weeks ago that I just released a review of his most recent film, The Favorite, but this is one that I haven't seen before, and I've been kind of intrigued by it, both because of the name and also the premise, and I'm kind of curious to see what I'm going to think of this one, because his movies are kind of a little bit odd sometimes, and I'm not a huge fan of his, but I'm curious to see what this one's like. And finally, at the end of the first order, the Bull Moose order, I've got another Alfred Hitchcock movie, and that is Murder, with an exclamation point. So another early Hitchcock. This one was from 1930, so the year after Blackmail, so this is, of course, another talkie film, but another one of his early movies that I haven't seen before. So I'm really excited to check out this murder mystery. It's one of the kind of prototypes for his classic sort of mystery thrillers that he became known for later in his career. Alright, next up we've got the Blu-rays I ordered directly from Kino Lorber as part of their While Supplies Last sale. This particular sale has been extended for a couple months here, but basically when they finally do sell out of any given movie, that Blu-ray is gonna be out of print. So I wanted to nab these just in case that actually happened. So the first movie here is A Man Alone. So this is a Western, and I think it's actually the only Western I have in this particular haul. And so this is from the mid-50s, was directed by Ray Milland and also stars him. And essentially he plays a man who's wrongfully accused of murder in kind of the Old West. So sounds like a simple enough premise, but seemed intriguing. Next movie here is Beggars of Life. So this one's pretty old. This one's from 1928, and this is actually a silent film. I don't have too many silent movies on Blu-ray. I have a handful, a few Hitchcock ones that I already mentioned earlier. I have Wings on Blu-ray, but this is one of my only silent films on Blu-ray. And so basically, this one sounded interesting. It's basically about this girl who kind of, gets involved in a murder and ends up kind of traveling across the country by train and trying to evade capture for this murder. So it's kind of a girl on the run sort of story. Sounded intriguing, especially for a silent film. So I'm curious to check this one out. Next up, we've got Driftwood. So this one seems really interesting. It seems to have been sort of billed as a family film, but it's like about an epidemic or a plague that hits a town, and so it's kind of this story of this doctor trying to prevent the spread of a plague. Kind of timely right now. But what really drew me into this one is that it stars a young Natalie Wood. And so I really love the movie Miracle on 34th Street, in large part because of her character in that movie. And so I wanted to see another movie with her, as a young actress. And so I'm really, really interested to kind of see what this one's all about. Next up, we've got another Sidney Poitier movie, and that is For Love of Ivy. And so this one's from the late 60s, and honestly, I really didn't know much about it. Sounds like he kind of plays this con man, and then it's sort of a romantic comedy, but I honestly don't know anything about it other than that. But like I said, I've been kind of on a Poitier kick lately here, so I figured might as well pick up another one of his. Next up, we've got Freeway. So this is the 1988 Freeway. I know there's quite a few movies called Freeway, but this one is basically about a kind of a serial killer or like a killing spree, murder spree it seems like by a priest on the highway. And so he's killing people along his travels. Again, don't really know too much about this one either, but it sounded kind of intriguing and figured I'd get it before it goes out of print. So next up is another movie that I've been aware of for a while, but I've never gotten around to see, and that is Grizzly. So this one is basically Jaws with a grizzly bear, and probably not as good of a movie as Jaws, but it's one of those kind of silly, sort of cheesy, big, when animals attack horror movies from the 70s. I'm a bear person, not grizzly bear, but black bear, and so I figured, why not? And this was also directed by the same guy who directed The Day of the Animals, which I actually have right within reach here. So The Day of the Animals, and this is another one of these kind of silly, ridiculous 70s when animals attack movies, so I'll add to that collection. Next up, I've got a slasher movie here, an 80s slasher. So this is The House on Sorority Row. So this is one of those kind of sort of final girl movies. Seems to have a lot in common with Black Christmas, at least in terms of premise, that it's set in a sorority house and that the girls get kind of killed off one at a time. But it's one that I have seen on lists of slasher movies in the past, but have never seen before, so figured I'd check this one out. Next up, we've got The Man Who Could Cheat Death. And so this is one of those Hammer horror movies from the 50s, and so basically it's kind of a sci-fi horror movie, kind of a cheap, sort of cheesy one, where this guy is a doctor, but he's been alive for like hundreds of years, and he takes like transplants, I think it's gland transplants, from people to retain his youth, and so he's, passing himself off as like a 30 or 40-year-old guy when he's a couple hundred years old. So sounds bad, but interesting. It's gonna be one of those kind of cheesy horror movies. Next up on the Sidney Poitier tour, we've got The Organization. So this is actually a sequel to In the Heat of the Night, which I showed you guys earlier. This is actually the third film in that Virgil Tibbs franchise. So now that I've got In the Heat of the Night, I figured I'd kind of fill out that franchise, so this is the third movie of that. Next up is kind of a weird one, and that's The Pied Piper. Of course, all of these are kind of weird, but this is a Jacques Demy movie, and so I have his set. I don't know if you guys can see it right there, but I have the Criterion set of his that I watched not too long ago, and I kind of liked several of the movies. And so this is another one of his films that's not in that set, and this one actually stars the singer Donovan as the Pied Piper, which is kind of interesting. You'd think it should be Crispin St. Peter's, considering he sang the Pied Piper song in the 60s. But anyway, I'm sure this one's going to be terrible, but I like Donovan, so I figured why not. Next up is Pit Stop. So this is a Roger Corman movie. So it's one of these kind of gritty sort of racing movies. It's one that I don't know a ton about and only kind of vaguely knew in terms of its name, but it seems to be pretty positively rated among people who like racing films, so I figured I'd try it out. This next one is probably the silliest of the bunch here and the kind of strangest sounding, and that is Ring of Bright Water. So apparently this movie is about an otter, and I don't really know too much about it other than the fact that Bill Travers and Virginia McKenna, I do know that they were a married couple who were kind of involved with animals, and I have another film of theirs called Born Free, which is too far, it's not right on hand. But Born Free was them kind of rehabilitating and working with a lion cub. So it seems like they did a similar thing with an otter. And so it's supposed to be a lot of kind of cute otter stuff. And it was really, really cheap. It was like $4. So I figured, why not have some otter movies. Next up, we've got The Scar. And so this is from the late 40s, and this is also known as Hollow Triumph. So not that you'd necessarily know either name, but The Scar or Hollow Triumph. And so this one is supposed to be kind of a film noir thriller, this kind of impersonation tale where this guy has to pretend to be somebody else and goes as far as, to cut his face up so he has a scar, the scar, that's the same as the guy he's trying to impersonate. So sounds pretty good. And then last up here for the Kino Lorber order is They Call Me Mr. Tibbs. So this is another Virgil Tibbs movie. This is the second film in that franchise. We had In the Heat of the Night, They Call Me Mr. Tibbs, and then The Organization. Again, none of which I've seen, but this is the one that I actually was aware of before any of them, mostly because of the Lion King reference when Pumbaa, of course, says They Call Me Mr. Pig, is a reference to They Call Me Mr. Tibbs. So that has made me want to kind of watch this movie for a few decades now. Alright, the third order here is from Screen Archives Entertainment, and it's actually the biggest of the three, consisting of Twilight Time releases, including a few SAE exclusives. So the first one here is 10 Rillington Place. So this one is a British crime drama, sort of a dramatization of a real-life serial killer named John Christie, and kind of what, the crimes he committed while staying at 10 Rillington Place. So this one stars Richard Attenborough, John Hammond himself, as this serial killer. So it sounded kind of interesting because I think serial killer movies are usually pretty interesting. Next up, we've got Bandit Queen. So this one was a very cheap movie in this list. It was one of the cheapest that they offered in the sale, which was why it caught my eye, because I had never heard of it before. But I figured since it was only like $4 or $5, I'd try it out. But then I really read up on it. It sounds very interesting. So this is an Indian film, and it is kind of a biopic dramatization of the life of Phoolan Devi, who was a woman that kind of was an activist for women's rights, but also sort of an activist regarding the caste system in India. And so this one is supposed to be very intense, very brutal, and it sounded kind of intriguing. And again, for like $5, I was definitely going to check this one out. So next up, I've got The Big Fix. So this one is a Richard Dreyfuss movie. It's kind of a comedy thriller where he plays a private investigator or a private detective, and he's kind of investigating a political smear campaign. And it seems like it's supposed to be a pretty good mix of kind of that PI thriller mystery side of things and also a bit of comedy. So it sounded pretty interesting. Next, I've got Black Widow. No, not that Black Widow, and not the Black Widow from the 50s either. This is from 1987, and this one kind of is like a femme fatale sort of movie. It's this undercover investigation of this suspected serial killer, and it sounded kind of interesting, and why not have another movie called Black Widow, because I'm sure when our Marvel Black Widow finally comes out, I'll also have that on Blu-ray, so I'll get to have 2 Black Widows. Next, we're kind of continuing the serial killer trend here with the Boston Strangler. So this is another one based on a real life serial killer. So this is from the late 60s, and this one is actually directed by the same guy that directed 10 Rillington Place, so Richard Fleischer. And so this one has an interesting cast that I'm really curious to see how they kind of work together in this type of movie. We got Tony Curtis, Henry Fonda, and George Kennedy. So it sounds like an interesting combination for a serial killer film. Next, we've got The Hospital. And so The Hospital is supposed to be a really, really dark comedy, like a dark satirical comedy. And so basically it seems to be about this doctor who's very depressed and I think kind of suicidal. And at the same time he has to deal with, sounds like a killer on the loose in the hospital. And it's this kind of weird intersection of all these things happening at one time on one night, I believe. So sounds kind of interesting and kind of strange. But I like interesting and strange movies, so we'll see. Next, we've got The Hot Rock. So this one is kind of a caper movie, like a heist kind of crime comedy drama. And this one also is kind of a stacked cast, but Robert Redford is kind of the lead here. And basically he kind of leads this this group of thieves, and they have to steal the same diamond repeatedly. I don't know why, but I know that they end up stealing the same thing several times. Assumingly they get it taken from them and then they have to steal it back again. But it sounds interesting. I like these types of kind of comedy caper movies. So curious to check that one out. Next up, I've got the first of a few Woody Allen movies I picked up as part of this. And so this one is Manhattan Murder Mystery. So this is interesting because it's actually kind of a reunion between him and Diane Keaton. Of course, they starred in Annie Hall together back in the 70s. This one's from the early 90s. But essentially, this one, they are a married couple. And there's like a kind of suspicious death of one of their neighbors, and they kind of take it upon themselves to investigate and then kind of somehow get wrapped up in the actual murder or death investigation of this neighbor. So sounds interesting, and I'm curious to see the two of them back together again after Annie Hall. Next up, we've got Model Shop. So this is another Jacques Demy movie. So I had the Pied Piper I got from Kino Lorber. Like I said, I have the Criterion films. And this one actually ties into some of those Criterion films, like Lola and The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. And so this one is, I believe, his first movie in the US. He may have released another one before this, but this one's set in LA and has some of the characters from those earlier movies. Lola, of his first movie, Lola, is kind of the main woman in this one. So I wanted to check this one out because it ties in with the Criterion films that I already have. Next up, we've got Moscow on the Hudson. And this is one that I had never heard of, but it's a Robin Williams movie. So I had never heard of this one. And it sounds kind of interesting. So this is a kind of early mid-80s film. And basically, Robin Williams plays as a sort of circus musician, a Soviet circus musician who's kind of on tour with a circus troupe, and while in the US he defects, and it's kind of this comedy drama about everything that happens after he does that. So sounds really strange, sounds interesting, and it's Robin Williams. So I wanted to see this one. Next up, we've got Pretty Poison. So this is a movie from the late 60s, and this one sounds really interesting because it stars Anthony Perkins, of course, of Hitchcock Psycho fame, as Norman Bates. But in this one, he seems to be a character who is sort of dealing with some issues, kind of similar to Norman Bates there. But basically, it seems like he sort of convinces this girl that he's actually a secret agent, and she kind of is a little crazy too, and so she goes along with it, and they kind of go on this kind of crime spree, pretending to be secret agents. Or at least that's what I kind of get out of this, and it's supposed to be kind of a dark comedy, sort of weird drama. Sounds really interesting, so I wanted to check this one out. Next up, we've got Resurrected. So this one, like Bandit Queen, was one of the really, really cheap movies, so that's why it initially caught my eye. And so basically this one is about a soldier who was kind of presumed dead, right? He was kind of MIA, and he comes back, but he has amnesia. But the real reason why I was very interested in this is that this was actually Paul Greengrass's first film, the director, Paul Greengrass. So he directed things like The Bourne Supremacy and Bourne Ultimatum, two movies that I really, really like. So I was really interested to see kind of what his first film was like. So that's why I picked this one up. Next, we've got Rita, Sue, and Bob 2. This was another one that was pretty cheap, and kind of initially didn't sound that interesting to me, because it seems like it's about these two friends, these two teens, and they get involved with kind of an older guy. But the more I kind of read about it, and some of the reviews and ratings were really positive, and kind of viewed this film as more of a commentary, a broader commentary than just on the kind of sex comedy that it kind of appears to be, at least at first glance. So I wanted to see what it was all about, because people seem to really like this one. Next up, we've got another Woody Allen film, and that's Shadows and Fog. So this one's another of his movies from the early 90s. And this is actually a black and white film that is sort of paying homage to German expressionist films. And in this one, it seems like there's a serial killer on the loose. Again, seems to be a common trend with these Twilight Time movies today. But there's a serial killer out there, and so Woody Allen and a whole bunch of other people are kind of part of this vigilante group trying to track down and find the serial killer. So it sounds interesting and kind of funny, but this one has an insanely stacked cast. So not only is it Woody Allen, but I mean just some of them on the back here, right? We got Mia Farrow, John Malkovich, Donald Pleasance, Kathy Bates, Jodie Foster, Lily Tomlin, John Cusack, and there were like 10 others that I was reading online. There are so many people in this movie. So I'm really interested to see if that big of a cast actually comes through well, or if it's like other really huge, kind of big name cast movies that don't do too much with their characters. So I'm really, really interested to check that one out, because it sounds pretty cool. Next, we've got Short Night of Glass Dolls. So this is another Italian giallo film. It's not a Dario Argento film, though, but it's from the early 70s, and basically it seems to be about a journalist, an American journalist, who, while I believe in Prague, discovers that his girlfriend's gone missing, so he's trying to find her and trying to investigate her disappearance. And it sounds kind of interesting, and again, these giallo movies are kind of these like thrillers, and they've got these this kind of intensity and this kind of over-the-top quality to them. So really curious to see kind of how that plays out for that movie. Next up, we've got Stardust Memories. So this is the third Woody Allen movie from this haul. And this one's a bit earlier than those last few. So this is 1980. And this one, basically Woody Allen plays a filmmaker. He plays a filmmaker who's sort of reminiscing on his past and his kind of inspiration and his passion for filmmaking. And so this one, it's also in black and white, kind of like Shadows and Fog. And just like how Shadows and Fog was kind of an homage to German expressionist films, this one is sort of an homage or parody to the movie 8½. So the Fellini film, which is also about a filmmaker and making movies and this whole kind of passion project thing. So this is sort of Woody Allen's take on that type of a film. Next we've got Suddenly Last Summer. So this is from 1959, and this one is sort of this mystery drama. And I know it's based on a play by Tennessee Williams, and usually movies based on plays aren't really a thing that I really enjoy, but this one sounds pretty interesting because it's a woman who kind of witnesses the death of her cousin, and then she sort of gets gaslighted about it, and they're threatening to lobotomize her because of what she's seen, and so it sounds really kind of intense. And this was also directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz, who directed All About Eve, which is, again, out of reach, but it's just up there, which is another a pretty intense kind of character movie. So I'm curious to see this because this one's, sort of same vintage as that. And next up here, we've got To Sir with Love. So this one is kind of closing out the Sidney Poitier collection from this haul. And this one is one that I've known about for a number of years, but again, for some reason, I've never gotten around to seeing. So this is a 1967 movie, and Poitier plays a teacher who kind of comes into this all-white school in London, and this is, he kind of gets this classroom of really rowdy troublemakers who've been, scaring off all the previous teachers. Nobody could handle them, right? And so he comes in and kind of against all odds, I think it's supposed to inspire this group. So it kind of, premise-wise, reminds me a little bit of the Morgan Freeman movie, Lean on Me. And so I'm really curious to see this one, because again, I've known about for a long time. Of course, I've heard the song, the Lulu theme song for this one, so really curious to finally check that one out. Alright, so that was my big April Blu-ray sale haul. Lots of obscure ones in there, but that's what's so great about some of these companies. Again, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying any of the Blu-rays I showed you today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. Also, I want to know, did you order anything as part of some of these April sales? Have you seen any of these more obscure movies? Let me know your thoughts and all of your Blu-ray pickups in the comments below. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insider information out of this haul video, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button, and if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe or add it to see more videos like this, as well as movie reviews. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainely Movies, the way life should be.